minutes, but I wanted to talk through a little bit of our community agreements. So if everybody could maybe like pay attention a little bit to this too. One mic. One mic. Thank you. Okay, so we have a list of community agreements here that we want to talk through as we enter and settle into the space, especially for this upcoming week. So welcome. We wanted to introduce this space and say that this is a space to provide unity, especially across the left. We want to make sure that we're able to find alignments together. And we want to make sure that in the process of doing that, that we're keeping each other safe in the process of doing so. So we're going to run through a few community agreements, and I hope we can all be copacetic about these, okay? So the first thing, no indoor eating or drinking. All food and water should be enjoyed outside. If an urgent health need comes up, and it's not possible to get outside, please mask immediately after taking care of your needs. You know, make sure to be tuning in with your body, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that in the next, in the future part of these community agreements. COVID safety, as you can see, we are saying that you need to be wearing an N95 or a KN95 at minimum. We do not want cloth or disposable masks, and we provide some at the front. And protect yourself and others, keep our movement strong. That is something that we've seen sometimes be lacking in a lot of movement spaces. So we want to make sure that we're paying attention, especially to our to disabled, immunocompromised, neurodivergent communities, okay? And select programming is available virtually. Stay home if you feel sick, even if you think it might be allergies, any recent exposure to COVID, or symptom-free but testing positive. The next part is about press and media. Media must remain outside on public property. If press approaches you, we recommend directing them to volunteers so trained media liaisons can answer questions. Just if any volunteers are in here, can you raise your hand? So guys, if you could just look around, these are your volunteers. A lot of us are going to be wearing name tags. So feel free to reach out to any of us if you have any needs or if you have any questions, okay? If you speak with press outside, be mindful of what you say on record. Consider how it might represent you and everyone in this space. We trust you. It's always okay to disengage with press without giving a reason. Next part is care for yourself and others. Throughout this week, we encourage everyone to check in with themselves and each other and tend to needs. During this event, this might mean folks stretch their body on the ground, tap their body, use a fidgeter, stim. Really, if you have any stimming, you need to walk around, you need to do anything, we actually encourage you to do that. We want anybody to feel as safe as they can in their bodies in this space. So do whatever you need to feel safe inside this space. And if you don't need to do those things, please be mindful of how you're reacting to everybody else. Again, this is a space that's rooted in disability justice, so make sure that you're being mindful of everybody that's in the space and attend to your own body, okay? Cool? Fantastic. No police. We do not call police. We do not talk with the police. If you need any support during the conference, organizers and volunteers are here for you. If you want a buddy to walk to your car, public transport, so you don't leave alone, or need help resolving a conflict, also please go to the volunteers and we will handle any of that, okay? Lead with respect and curiosity. This moment is only happening now, so enjoy it. And make space, take space during discussions. Notice if others are trying to talk. If you're feeling shy, consider that someone might benefit from your perspective. Safely build community. No, this might be an intense and vulnerable week. It can be a powerful time to share space with others while respecting boundaries and privacy. Be mindful of personal info you share with others, you know, standard security culture. You may be meeting for the first time. Consider what you're asking from people you're meeting. Refrain from recruiting, asking personal info, etc. Again, this is a unifying space, so of course get to know each other, but you know, this isn't a place to just like get people into your org. This is for generative conversation, this is for learning, okay? This part's really important. Nobody is disposable, we uplift survivors. We recognize the intersection of all our struggles and will not discard, minimize, or invisibilize the safety and traumas of any group. In fact, we will remain curious. Repeat after me, remain curious. Awesome. And deepen our solidarity with those frequently forgotten and disposed of by the state and hegemonic society. We want to co-create spaces of care and center those most impacted. And we really want to make a firm statement about this. If you have a safety concern about someone you know in this space, they have caused sexual harm or violence to you or your community, please speak to a volunteer. The people that raise their hands, if you want to go and disclose this to them, we have a process for handling that. So please go to a volunteer and we can help with that, okay? If you are a person named as causing sexual harm and violence and are not participating in consenting repair with your community or victim, we ask you to exit the space. So just want to put that out there for everybody, okay? We will have a note taker present for this in the back that will be taking notes of all the panels. So we will be sending that out via email if you provided that to participants virtually and here. And so we have just 2 points of unity. The first one is co-strugglers. We center Black, Palestinian, Indigenous, trans, queer, and disabled attendees and speakers. None of us are free until all of us are free. And then US settlers. Recognize that most of us are occupiers on land of the Ojibwe, Odawa, and Potawatomi, and other indigenous tribes across Turtle Island. So yeah, that is all the community agreements, and we will be starting soon. And we also want to make sure that anybody, if you have fat body, have canes, or need any spaces to sit, we have leather chairs at the front. We want to encourage people to give up their seats if there's somebody more in need of these spaces, in need of these seating. So yes, if anybody needs a seat that doesn't already have one, feel free to let us know. We have 2 up here. But yeah, everybody feeling good? Awesome. So we'll be starting in about 5 minutes. Thank you.
to give it back so you can actually have it. You don't have to borrow it. It's yours.
I'll take it. Now I need is a pen.
Hello.
Oh, I do a microphone.
Thank you.
Thank you. What you can do, you can like tie them around behind the back of your head.
I'm not sure what you mean.
Like the straps, like if you get like another like a rubber band or something, you can like loop them around. Okay. Okay. That's if it works, it works.
So, Colby, when you're done with the first part, you're going to split, right?
I have to leave by 4. Like I can stay around for most of it.
You decide, but when you need to go, no worries.
Okay. Yeah, 4. Hello? No, I'm at the Dissenters event. Okay.
Is this okay?
Yep. Thank you. Yeah, of course. Thank you, sir. Okay, folks, we're going to get started. If everybody wants to grab a seat or gather around, we're going to start soon. First of all, thank you all for being here, and thank you for the work you do. I recognize a lot of folks from the various struggles to stop the genocide, and we are here to fuck the Genocidal National Convention. So, thank you. You know, I don't think anybody should meet anywhere without noting this political moment that 40,000 people have been killed in a genocide, a pre-announced genocide. They said they were going to commit genocide, they are, and the U.S. is fully facilitating it. It wouldn't happen without us. We are so right to be here in opposition. So I'm deeply, deeply grateful. We're going to introduce ourselves quickly, talk a little bit about what's going on this week, and then we're going to welcome in some folks coming in from a distance. So I'm Bill Ayers. I am an organizer, activist, retired professor. Very excited to be with you all today, and very excited, looking forward to the events this week.
Hi, can folks hear me? Hi, everybody. My name is Dixon Romeo. I'm the executive director of NotMeWe, a community group in South Shore and adjacent neighborhoods on the south side. And we organize around housing, parents with young people, mutual aid. And so very happy to be here with you guys today.
Hello, everybody. My name is Kobe. He, him pronouns. I am one of the co-chairs of the Coalition to March on the DNC. I'm also a co-chair of the Chicago Alliance Against Racist and Political Repression. We fight to empower communities to handle, to hold the police accountable, and we also fight to get wrongfully convicted and torture survivors out of prison.
So what I would like us to do, I'd like Dixon and Cole to do, is two quick things. One is to, as best you can, name this political moment. Where are we? And talk a bit about the work you're doing, because you want folks to know about it right now.
Kobe go first?
So the question is political moment and how we see it connected to the work that we're doing. So I think that this is, how much time we got? 2 minutes. 2 minutes. I think that this moment for me, someone who's like a local community organizer, is really, really enlightening, right? I think that from 2020 until now, obviously we can go back a lot further for all these struggles that we're fighting against, but it's a moment where we're seeing we're seeing like a full cycle of like how radicalization and how folks who are really trying to address the things that they're dealing with, whether it's at a local level like us or international, keep going. Do I keep? Is there like a sound person? Do I keep going? Are we good? And I think that we've seen, radical language and causes that we all care about be co-opted to a degree over the last 4 years or 5 years, from 2020 until now. Everything I think from the justice, housing rights, right, organizing that we do, organizing around the police, has all been kind of started to be co-opted in this moment. And I think that for me, right, and for us, organizing in the eviction capital of the city, right, which is also the neighborhood that's receiving the most influx of new arrivals, right, who are being sent here from Texas, right, like, in a very inhumane way. And it's also a neighborhood like primed to be gentrified, being next to the Obama Center, right? Like there's so many different things, right, that touch a neighborhood, and there are a lot of folks who are coming to the city in this moment to like celebrate or to market the city in a way in which we're going to talk about as like a world-class city, all the things that it has to offer, while the neighborhoods that don't receive that are getting the bare brunt of that. And those things are connected to the ways in which we are, funding and supporting genocide, right? And there's a connection there, right? Like there are tenants who live in HUD buildings, right, who are not living in proper conditions because that money is being spent and sent to bomb people, right? Like that is the connection that we're trying to drive home with our folks in this moment. And yeah, that's all I'll say about it.
Yeah, I agree with pretty much everything that Dixon said. And, I think I think about that Charles Dickens book intro a lot. It was the best of times, it was the worst of times, because we're dealing with, we're living in a time where we're seeing this brutality, on this mass scale. We're seeing all this trauma, we're seeing this disregard, from our quote-unquote representatives and from the corporations and the rich people who control this society. We're seeing such a disregard for human life, such a hatred for human life, and a complete disregard for the planet that we all have to live in, right? So, we're seeing so much evil, for lack of a more scientific word, on one side, but then we're also seeing what we're seeing in this room, right? We're seeing what we've seen millions of people in Yemen coming out every Friday to stand in solidarity with Palestine. We've seen people marching in South Africa. We've seen the South African government, which I don't know if you can, my accent has gotten a little bit weaker, but I grew up in South Africa, so I'm really proud of what South Africa has done in taking Israel to the International Court of Justice. We're seeing people rising up against their exploitation, against their oppression, in numbers that we haven't really seen before. A lot of people, I've been getting interviews from all these corporate media outlets, and they all want to know, well, how do you compare this moment to 1968, right? Like, there's a lot of superficial stuff that is similar. There's a war, there's a Democratic Party convention happening in Chicago, and there's a large student uprising. But at the same time, we're ahead, of where we were in 1968. We just had, in 2020, quantitatively the biggest rebellion that we've had in this country, right? If you had asked me in 2019 or even in January of 2020, when do you think you're going to see a police station burning down? I would have said maybe 2030, maybe 2035, right? But then by half a year later, we're seeing these things that we never would have imagined. So we are seeing, by the people coming out, by the people becoming more and more conscious of their exploitation, of their oppression, and how that connects to the exploitation and oppression of people in other countries. We're seeing things that we never would have thought were possible only a few months, a few years ago.
Hey, Vicky?
I'm sorry?
Vicky? Could you come down for a minute and help me get the sound?
Okay, well, I guess that is my cue to wrap up anyway.
That doesn't do any good in here. Having some folks come in virtually. But I want to.
Hi, David. I can hear you, but I can't hear.
Toby and I about the worst of times and the best of times, because on the one hand, there's a proxy war in Europe, there's a rising Cold War in Asia, there's a genocidal war in the Middle East. The U.S. is up to their elbows in all of it, and that's horrible. On the other hand, the resistance, as you said, in 10 months, the narrative about Israel, U.S. role with Israel has changed. That's because of the Palestinian people, it's because of the team, it's because of Dissenters, it's because of all the organizing and energy is done. So I think we have to kind of say, best of times, worst of times. Political repression, police violence continues apace. At the same time, when we have the biggest rising of deaths, racial oppression we've ever had in this country. So we have to kind of not see it as in a one-sided way. And again, people say to me, well, 68, that was an historic moment. We're living in a historic moment. And the idea that we would be nostalgic is a little bit insane.
Hello, hello.
Hey, hard to hear you guys.
Hey, so the sound seems to be coming in really strong, and then the mics are reverbing. So I just want to check with somebody about that. I fear the moment someone says something loud and it hits the mic, and we're all like in pain.
Okay, I want to welcome our virtual guests. Good to see you. And I don't know all of these folks, but I know Laura and David very well. They're people. You know, one of the things that we prepare for, we want to have an integration dialogue, but I think it's also important to know that the idea that there is such a thing as the 60s is somewhat.
Hi, everyone. So sorry I can't be there. And it's a little hard to hear you, but I think I got it. Okay. Laura Whitehorn, she, her pronouns. I work at an organization that I helped found along with our dear departed comrades Mujahid Fareed and Kathy Boudin and our friend, the attorney Sophia Elijah. So David is very much part of RAP. And what am I supposed to talk about? Oh, God. Yeah, I know. When I saw that question, I started thinking, and I thought this could be if David and I do this, although he spent 40 years in prison. I only spent 15 years. So my gap is less than his. We could be here all day naming the things. But I started with the SNCC, with Friends of SNCC, Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, to doing what I thought was fighting racism as a white person. Then I was moved by the Black Panther Party to understand that it was a struggle for power. I was part of the anti-war movement. I was part of the lesbian women's movement of the anti-war movement. One of the things we did was take over a Harvard building and hold, none of us was a student at Harvard, but we found a Harvard building. We figured, okay, there are a bunch of war researchers, let's get them. Held it for 11 days. So occupation. Let's see, I worked on the Attica Rebellion was a big moment in my life because it was another rebellion. And I was part of the support for that. And that brought us closer to working with the indigenous movement because of the indigenous incarcerated men who were charged with murder from the Attica Rebellion. I worked on the John Brown Anti-Klan Committee for years and the Manambin Graphics Collective. If Mary Patton is in the audience, she was another member of the Manambin Graphics Collective. The John Brown Anti-Klan Committee came out of what Malcolm said about if white people want to help fight racism, let them do what John Brown did. And then we actually tried to do that later. I worked on the cases of political prisoners for years and was an abolitionist early on did work in solidarity with Palestine for years in prison, like David and Kathy and others. I did AIDS education and advocacy and support. And I was particularly involved with fighting against the counterintelligence program under the leadership of Mutulu Shakur and Afeni Shakur, both sadly passed now, who had something called the National Task Force for COINTELPRO Litigation and Research. And again, they told us, you know, when the government kills and does dirty tricks against Black people, you know, everyone just shrugs. That's par for the course. But if you show the cases that they did against you as part of the Weather Underground, which I was also in, then we can get attention. So that's what we did. And then after prison, I came out and I was determined to help get out the other political prisoners. And early on, Eddie Ellis, who's also passed, who was a Black Panther and incarcerated in New York State for more than 20 years, said to me and other people, if you keep talking about political prisoners, that's great. You'll build a movement around political prisoners, but they're not going to get out. You have to put them in the category of older people in prison and the people who've served these long sentences. And so, you know, a few years, it took me a while to get, I'm a slow learner, but after a while we got it, and we did start releasing aging people in prison. And, you know, I am happy to say that it was a successful strategy and continues to be as we're trying to abolish the prison system. And I'm very active in the Palestine Solidarity Movement, and was really honored to go on a trip to Palestine in 2016.
Yeah, one of the benefits of getting out from prison is I've been able to go on free Palestine demonstrations. And that's been exciting, and to see the youth and the spirit and the energy, even like while we don't forget for a minute the unspeakable genocide that's going on. I'm not doing much organizational work. I have a historic relationship to Rap and Laura. Not doing much organizational work now, which I regret, but I'm putting myself in a better position to be able to do that. Historically, to try to be brief, like Laura, I was inspired by civil rights and then by the Panthers and by Vietnam and the range of national liberation struggles going on throughout the global South. And as the movement developed, I also had a lot to learn from women's liberation movement. So in the 60s, I was in civil rights. Starting in 1960, I was in anti-war. I joined Students for a Democratic Society as an anti-imperialist. In the 70s, I was with the Weather Underground for most of that decade. In the 80s, I was working in solidarity with the unit of the Black Liberation Army. One armed action tragically went awry with many tragic consequences. But I went into prison in 81 and did 40 years. But even in prison, you can continue to be an organizer. And I did a lot of work around AIDS in prison. I did a lot of work around prisoners' rights and challenging the prison system as a whole.
Hi, my name is Aislinn Pulley, and I am currently serving as the executive director of the Chicago Torture Justice Center. And we were born out of the 2015 reparations ordinance for survivors of Chicago police torture, which came out of basically a 40-year movement to expose the torture that was occurring and continues to occur in a different manifestation now. But that was largely led by the former CPD commander, John Burge, who was in the Vietnam War, and in Vietnam used torture techniques on the population there. He then brought those techniques back to Chicago in about 1970, about a year and a half after the assassination of Chairman Fred and Deputy Mark Clark, and joined the force. He quickly rose within the ranks, largely because of his ability to close cases. What started coming out was that he was using torture techniques, and survivors immediately began attempting to get out these stories, but they were suppressed. Suppressed in terms of the attorneys that they were reaching out to, judges, you know, and on and on and on. The earliest case that we know is from 1972, so almost immediately after he was hired. Fast forward to the early 90s, there had been at least a trickle of cases that had gained public attention, and a few people had been released from prison as a result. Gregory Banks was the first one who was released. And that allowed other people then to cite Greg's case in their court cases as evidence that torture indeed did happen. And then by the time the early 90s came, there was enough evidence that there was pressure to force him to be fired by the city of Chicago, and John Burge was finally fired. And this is now 20 years after he joined the force. However, torture didn't stop. He trained tons and tons of other police officers. Some of them were known as the Midnight Crew. Other crews had different names, but they tortured primarily and predominantly Black people, but not exclusively. They also tortured Latinx people and white people all across the city, but primarily on the south sides and the west sides. And these people continued torturing. And in total, John Burge, a very conservative estimate, is that he tortured about 120 primarily Black people. That's the number that the city agreed to. So after he was fired in the early 90s, more and more cases started coming to light. And in the early 2000s, civil rights attorney Stan Willis went to the United Nations to petition to try to get some international attention on what was happening. And the United Nations Committee Against Torture agreed that reparations was owed to people in Chicago, and that the city of Chicago owed reparations. We were then able to use that to advance the movement. And at that time, one of the major calls was to try John Burge. He was eventually tried for obstruction of justice and perjury. The statute of limitations had expired on torture. So he was tried by the federal government and then found guilty and sentenced. He ended up doing 4 years. The community at that point, this is the mid, like 2010s, the community at that point felt like it was a slap in the face. It was not something that was going to restore people based on the harm that was committed. It wasn't going to restore families, restore communities. It wasn't going to free people. And so the community gathered and came together to reimagine what could reparations look like beyond the carceral system, beyond the limits of the carceral system. And an exhibit was put on, and that exhibit called for submissions. One of the people who submitted a piece of art was Joey Mogul with the People's Law Office. And Joey is an attorney and was working on many of these cases for decades at this point, and submitted an ordinance inspired largely by Stan Willis. And the ordinance was a reparations ordinance. And survivors and communities said, let's make this real. And so we actually got city council people to introduce it. And then it was quickly went into the rules committee, assumed dead. This is about 2013. And then, or 2012, and then 2014 runs around. And that year, CPD killed about 20 people. One of the people they killed was a young man named Dominique Franklin on May 20th. And he was tased to death. by CPD. And this is, this is why some of the movement demands at that time were about use tasers, not guns. Well, he was tased to death. The community gathered around his death, and we formed We Charge Genocide. And then later that year in August, Ferguson happened. And now we're, now at the 10-year anniversary of Ferguson. And so what was happening was a seismic shift in consciousness and awareness regarding the systemic reality of police violence and police murder and killing. And We Charge then decided at the point where our mayor at the time, Rahm Emanuel, was forced into a runoff election for the first time in 50 years, let's use this opportunity of his political weakness to really galvanize support. And so we did a 6-month targeted campaign, heavy actions. We took over public transit. We did mock ballots. We created a curriculum that we offered online for free and asked people to hold their own teach Burge, like teach-ins with family and friends. And we did rallies, we did a whole plethora of things. It was very, very, very action heavy, and we were successful. And this is on the aftermath of Ferguson. This is on, during this politically right political moment. And we were successful. Rahm Emanuel brought the ordinance out of committee and put it up for vote, and it passed unanimously. And that then created the first reparations ordinance of its kind in the country. It also created, unbeknownst to us, none of us that I'm aware of realized what we were doing, but we also created the first center dedicated to domestic torture in the country. And that's where I work now, the Chicago Torture Justice Center. There are about 16 torture centers in the country, but they're restricted through their grants funding federally to only treat international torture survivors. I didn't know that at the time. I don't think we knew that as a movement, but because of the movement, we thereby were able to subvert this restriction and become the first. We should not be the first, and we should not be the only. There should be many, many, many torture centers, or many centers in the country that can address and treat domestic torture, because John Burge was not an anomaly. Despite the city's attempts to paint him as this one bad apple, we know that it's systemic. He was able to rise and be promoted as a part of the larger strategy of the rise of mass incarceration, the war on drugs, the war on the poor, the war on gangs, which is, all kind of synonymous. And so now we exist. We're on 63rd and Woodlawn. If you're visiting Chicago for the first time, feel free to stop by and check it out. There are still people incarcerated that we are working really hard to try to free. We work with all the folks who are physically present here on the panel with Kobe and Dixon and Bill. And it's going to take all of us to really tear down this system. We are dedicated to dismantling mass incarceration, certainly, but the carceral system as a whole, which is beyond just prisons. It includes the policing, it includes surveillance. And so that's my intro.
So we have 3 experienced and dedicated organizer activists virtually. We have Colby and Dixon up here. The hybrid model and Zoom in general makes it hard to have a conversation, and yet that was our goal. We want to have a conversation, so we want you to interrupt one another. The Zoom is more given to kind of webinars and giving speeches, but we really want to have a conversation. And the conversation we want to have is about naming this political moment, how you see it, and what are some of the themes, contradictions, challenges, and opportunities, both based on your history, the 5 of you, but also based on how you see where we are now. Because the big question that's looming is, where do we go from here? Chaos or community? And that's kind of the question we want to ask. So let me turn to you, to those of you who are coming in virtually, and say, talk a bit about this political moment and what some of the contradictions are that you think are themes that go back a long ways, or things that you think are unique. And feel free to interrupt one another and have a conversation with each other, even though I recognize that it's harder. If we were sitting next to each other, we could elbow each other. But why don't you start, Laura? Naming this political moment, talking about some of the contradictions and themes.
I've been talking with friends about this. I think it's community when you give that choice, chaos or community, but chaos is also going on in part of it. But, you know, I was on a Zoom educational with Wissam Rafidi. He was speaking. I wasn't with him. He's in Palestine a few weeks ago. And while he was talking, and he was talking about Access Storm, which is the name that the resistance gives to October 7th. And, you know, here we're very, especially those of us who work with groups like JVP, I work with them. I also work with Palestinian Youth Movement, a bunch. But we're used to looking at and being very upset and depressed by the level of brutality and suffering that's going on. It's almost unbearable. It's like for people, I don't know, David, if you feel this too, but for people like me, who I was born in 1945, so who grew up in the shadow of the, you know, concentration camps, it was sort of like, okay, this, you know, UN is created, we're not going to do this again. And of course, there have been many genocides since then, but this one on television all the time. So it's very easy to become, and then, you know, watching Trump, and it's very easy to become discouraged. But when Wissam was talking about Access Storm, it just all of a sudden I thought of the Tet Offensive during the war in Vietnam, which shocked the world, shocked the US. It wasn't a military victory quite, but it was a total political victory, 1968, and it was the beginning of the end for US imperialism trying to, you know, destroy the people of Vietnam, which had looked to us so powerful. You know, it was like our chants were all, the people's spirit is greater than the man's technology and stuff like that, but we saw the man's technology more than we saw. So it's just, it's, to me, that's a lesson. And in the time, and David and I have talked about this a lot. I mean, full disclosure, we talk to each other. So we don't always agree, but we agree a lot. And you know what you said, David, about the uprisings in the global South, Africa, Asia, Latin America, the anti-colonial struggles that were coming to fruition in our, you know, in that era. The strategy of too many Vietnams, create too many Vietnams. I see that strategy again when I listen to the organizers from the Palestinian movement. I don't know if others were in Detroit at the big conference in the end of March, who talked about creating disruption to the US war machine and the US capitalist machine. And so I see a lot of parallels, even though we're in a very different historical period. You know, there was the Bandung conference before Vietnam, which was the non-aligned nations and unity among the, you know, anti-imperialist forces. And we are seeing some of that kind of thing happening again. So I think it's very, I hear it all the time. We do a vigil every Monday in my neighborhood, which is actually pretty amazing because we are not a radical neighborhood. And it's an yeshiva university, and a lot of Zionist entities are up here. And I hear all the time this other thing that people say, the people my age get up and speak, and they say, you know, the anti-war movement against Vietnam won the war in Vietnam. And I say, I see David laughing because we have unity on this. No, actually, it was the Vietnamese people who won the war against the United States. So there are certain political essential points that I feel as if are really important in this moment. I mean, the movement now is more sophisticated and more, I don't know, more feminist, more less racist, more, just so many good things that our movement wasn't. So that's why I say community. This movement understands community in a way that we didn't. There aren't a few leaders who speak for the movement. It's more general. So I actually think that that is the moment we're in. While it is painful and awful and depressing, it is also full of hope.
Yeah, I think the one of the things I'm thinking about as you were talking is around this idea of like, I think the thing that I'm thinking a lot about in this moment is the idea of like structure and like rigor in terms of like how we are going about actually organizing enough people, having enough conversations, and like bringing enough folks in to understand one, how long, right, the trajectory is of this fight is for us, but also the contradictions and things that I think folks who are here in this room are like organizing understand, but that the folks who are walking into, you know, our marches or our offices or who we're meeting on the street don't really know, right? Like, I think for me, this last year has been, the last 4 or 5 years in general, has been a moment where I think there is a greater connection. I think you were saying it, right? Like a more sophistication in terms of like inclusiveness and stuff. But I think that in addition to that, there's like a real need for us to like really work with folks backwards from like where we ultimately do want to go with folks, right? Like we don't want, I think, you know, me and Aislinn have talked about this, right? Like I don't want 60,000 people in Woodlawn and South Shore to like really understand, right, like why housing should be free and like have no understanding of like Palestine or like no understanding of like why the police are bad, right? And so, or like need to be abolished, right? And so I think like working in solidarity with folks, but also like being really clear with our leaders, like how all these different things connect, right? Is key. And then being honest about like, what does it take for us to actually like achieve said goals that we're looking for, whether they're like local, national, international. I think that I'm always very honored to like hear from folks who have organized before us, like taking action, taking risk, those who lived to tell about it, those who didn't, right? Like you read their writings, but it's important for us to like study and understand the history of what we've been doing, but also like be grounded in the fact like these are like data points and like the other pieces we have to figure out, and like that requires like actual practice, right? Like we can't like, you know, I could read Bill's books a million times, but it's like, you know what I mean? Like I gotta then have to go out and talk to someone and like be in organization and be in community with each other. And I think like this moment, folks are getting closer and closer, I think, to feeling pushed to the point where we are being more, I think, direct, but also more like critical and rigorous about where we're trying to go, right? And I think for me, that's like, that's the hopeful part, right? That's the community part, right? Like these structures that we live in like don't work. They don't work if you know, are arriving in Chicago on a bus, right? From Texas, you just cross the border from Venezuela. They're not working if your family's been in Chicago for 60 years and you live on the south side or the west side. They're not working for you if you're white and you live in like most white folks, right? And like Andersonville or like, you know, like wherever you're at, right? Like these things actually don't work. And so the more and more we like go through the cycles of like testing stuff out and seeing why it doesn't work, we get closer to accepting the fact that like we're gonna have to create a thing that there's always gonna be some chaos, right? But like everyone has food, everyone gets fed, no one gets murdered, right? Like massacres. So I think like that's the part that's important for me in this moment, right? Like how do we not repeat 2020 where folks like catch the lingos and slogans, but then we get like co-opted into this thing, and how we get folks to really see the core contradictions of what's going on around all these issues we face, right? And like what's going on this week, right? The DNC is like a really important moment for like, I think, political folks, where this is like a capstone or like it is the Super Bowl of like, you know, American, you know, like, well, the Super Bowl is the Super Bowl, but you know what I'm saying? But like, it is the Super Bowl of like American political like ideology and commentary, right? Like the clips and slogans and things that come out of this are gonna resonate for the next 4 years unless we are like actively organizing against it, right? And so I think like us being clear about that, us having conscious about that is like that's something I'm thinking about a lot in this moment.
Can I add something?
Yeah, please, Colby.
So, I 100% agree. And, Dixon, when you said, like, these systems are not working, when you said for us, they're not working for us, that's the most important part, I think. Because, like, you can only make a mistake so many times, right? Like, if somebody's been making the same mistake for 400 years, at some point, it's like, well, you're doing this shit on purpose, so... Like when someone is exploiting and is oppressing and is repressing people for centuries, like there's a method to it, right? Like there's a reason that they do it. So it's not just like, a broken system. It's a system that is doing what it was designed to do, which is create poverty on one end and wealth on the other. So, the system is working for Elon Musk, right? It's working for Bill Gates. It's not working for anybody in this room. And I think kind of what educates people about, when into that. Well, let me back up for a second. I think that's why events like this are so important. That's why protesting is so important. All those books, that's why that's so important to educate ourselves, educate each other, to go out into your community and talk to people and, help people understand how their individual issues are connected to systemic issues, right? Like if somebody is, for example, like they're facing an eviction, that's how they see, okay, the police who are allegedly supposed to serve and protect, they're the ones who are throwing my shit out onto the sidewalk, right? They go and they try to hold those police accountable for violating their rights. They see the judges are also in on the situation, right? The prosecutors, the prisons, the whole system is guilty. And then, you take it a step further, you look on the news and you see, oh, well, my tax dollars, instead of going to supporting housing, are going to committing genocide, right? So, like the more you work, the more you fight against the people who are actually controlling the system, the more you realize that this system needs to be completely overthrown, and we need to build, like, those of us in here, those of us who are working class, those of us who are oppressed, we need to be the ones who rebuild something that actually works for us.
I want to invite Aislinn and David to say something, and then I've got a bunch of questions from what's been said so far. Aislinn, do you want to add to this conversation?
Sure. I'll also just say quickly that I founded the Chicago chapter of BLM as a result of taking about 20, 30 young folks to Ferguson during the uprising. And so I say that to also mention that I was not, and the chapter was not prepared for 2020. I'm a child of organizers. And so part of the excitement of seeing Ferguson and the uprising was seeing these theories and these things that I had read about in history happening before my eyes. And so I knew that it was a really important historical moment, that something really important was happening and moving. And some of what I'm still processing post 2020 is how do we create organizations that can contain and withstand massive upheaval without imploding? How do we create the infrastructure necessary that reflects our political values, that is aligned and that is able to be malleable enough to then work when it's just a handful of people who are kind of the core leading stuff, to when you have over 200 people joining? Because at our height, we had over 200 people joining, and then we put a pause on membership because we were trying to figure out, how do we vet people? How do we get people in? But for most of the years, there was just a handful of us who really held the work. So I have, since 2020, I'm still learning and reflecting. And, I think there's there's a lot of things about the movement that that are, I think, political contradictions that exist. There's also, of course, the role of the state and the ever-present, coercive power of all the shit that they do, both overtly and covertly, which are important, right? But particularly important in this particular type of organizing work. But even with that said, there's such a I was surprised when Laura said there is a maturation, because I always felt like we're not mature enough, as in, like, politically mature enough in the movement, because we don't agree on so many things in terms of what we're trying to create. We agree on police killing folks is bad. That should end. Mass incarceration should end. Capitalism needs to end. Some of us also make a leap and are wrestling with imperialism. But what are we fighting to do? And not that there's a simple answer, because there isn't a simple answer. But I think that gray area then leaves room for a lot of work that we need to intellectually argue and test with and experiment with intention. And what does it mean then to, and we had these arguments around CPAC and around community control of the police. And I think in Chicago, we were able to enter a conversation around that advanced the discourse in a really important way, because we're oftentimes arguing these theoretical points, right? About, like, theoretical based on our current reality in the United States, on post-capitalism. But we need to really, I think, deepen and offer more experiences and more opportunities to really test our theories and test our arguments, and really be open to fail. Because that's how you learn. Like with anything, in science, you have to test the hypothesis, and then you learn more, you get more knowledge. So I would love us to be able to, one of the biggest contradictions I see is in our ideological contradictions amongst the movement, both stated and kind of implicitly implied, and wanting us to be able to move that forward, because we absolutely can overthrow, dismantle mass incarceration and U.S. capitalism as an imperial project. That is completely possible. We know historically that's possible. This is a very young empire, and all empires fall. What are we working to create? And how are we then working within movements to, create those, create the opportunity to imagine deeper beyond what we're told is possible under capitalism as we understand it today. And so that's where I feel that we haven't matured enough. I'd love us to be able to, with rigor and with generosity, and grace, be able to experiment and test these theories, and then learn in real time, instead of kind of one of the, I think, most difficult things is seeing some of these older organizations just become ossified, and this is the time to experiment.
Yeah, I want to start with a salute to this generation of activists, or better yet, an embrace, because I think people have been amazing. The George Floyd uprisings and the response to the horror of the genocide in Gaza, and tremendous energy and spirit. And to pick up on what Laura said, I think compared to the 60s or 70s, this, at least within the predominantly white left of the time, it was all male dominated, very macho, very arrogant. And I think women's leadership and people of color's leadership and Palestinian and Arab leadership, I don't want to downplay that there are internal tensions and problems and issues, I'm sure there are, but I think there's been a better spirit of community. and building and listening to each other and working through issues. So I want to embrace that and acknowledge that. At the same time, let's also acknowledge that this is a very, very dangerous moment. Throughout the history of capitalism, imperialism, people have been genocided, people have been starved and beaten and jailed. We additionally now have the danger of nuclear war as NATO relentlessly pursues its proxy war in the Ukraine. We have the danger of collapse, not only of global warming, but of several key ecosystems. So the threats are existential. And it's what does that mean? It doesn't mean, it really means what everybody's been saying, but I want to emphasize that's the situation. And that makes the work we do even more crucial than it always was, and even more urgent. And we have to learn to feel that urgency and that passion without arrogance towards people who don't understand it yet. Because we have to organize. When people look back at the 60s, they look back at the inflection points of Columbia strike, but there were years of in-depth, consistent organizing that built the basis for that. And I know that the years of work of the Palestinian pro-Free Palestine movement that preceded this situation, and it's part of why the situation could take off. But that would be the main, the one other thing I want to emphasize is when we look at all the horrors of the current system, and there are a lot that don't get any attention, like the economic sanctions on 40 countries, mainly in the global south, the structural adjustment programs that enforce horrible economic conditions, as well as the internal subversion and the military and the coups. As horrible as that all is, it's done to enforce an economic system where 6 billion people in this world live in poverty, and where 5 million children under the age of 5 die every year from easily preventable causes. So that's the nature of the system. The flip side of that, as Malcolm X taught, and the reason they went after him, is we're part of a global majority. And the people power is what's ultimately, and especially when Malcolm highlighted the connection between national liberation struggles within the US, Black liberation, indigenous, Latino, and the vast majority in the global South. How in this time of chaos and destruction, how to channel that and feel connected to it and build it is a major question. But I just wanted to frame the danger of the period and also the potential we have, as the vast majority of people in the world have a tremendous interest in the type of change you were talking about, Aislinn.
Welcome, Jalil. We're talking about contradictions, where we're going from here. I mean, I think that one of the things several people have hit on is that you can't build a movement without changing the narrative. And in some ways, what's happened in 10 months of genocide in Gaza is the narrative about Israel as a peaceful, democratic country in the Middle East has been ripped asunder. I think Aislinn raises an important question. What is our North Star? What is it we're trying to fight toward? How do we name it? How do we organize people in real time on real issues, and at the same time never give up what the vision we have of a new society? But one question that I have that I keep coming back to is, why is the DNC an important place to demonstrate? Is it an important place to demonstrate? If it is, why?
Can I?
If I can, excuse me for my tardiness in getting on. I had a prior engagement. Nonetheless, I just like to chime into something that my dear comrade David stated in regards to our overall struggle. And the question that you asked is, where do we go? Where's our North Star and where we're going from here? And given the dire conditions from which we are organizing in, and this kind of apathy that we have going across the country, there's some glimmer of hope in terms of what we're trying to organize, particularly in regards to creating alternative systems of governing, and why that is necessary, and the decolonization programs, and why that is essential. Trying to get people to recognize that this set of corporate government, this entity, is declining, right? And ultimately, we're going to have the brunt of effect of it, the brunt of the effect of its decline, and particularly the Black, brown, and indigenous people in this country. We're going to suffer. And so what we have to do is try to create or envision what it would look like without having to have to be dependent upon this entity for your survival, right? And that's what we're calling for the People's Senate. After the 2021 tribunal, where International Tribunal found the United States guilty of genocide against Black, brown, indigenous people, right? A historic event and declaration by the esteemed body of international tribunals. And so for that understanding, it is imperative that we, people of color particularly, remove ourselves from a system that's based upon this idea of white supremacy, right? And that capitalist exploitation of particularly poor people. The same people they brought here and changed are the same people who continue to be the least to have the any equitable distribution of wealth or growth. In fact, you'll find that if you look at our statistics in terms of the growth of Black population in this country, it is not growing. All right. And so we have some serious issues that we have to address in this country. And the way we have to do so in the way that we are suggesting or arguing towards is building what we call the People's Senate. All right. And begin to find means where we have some commonality or struggle on the national level, right? Essentially, almost like when we consider a national front, right? We have to really consider creating alternative systems of governing.
Jalil, would you introduce yourself and tell a little bit about your history, very short, and what you're up to now?
Yeah, Jalil Muntaqim, veteran member of the Black Panther Party, Black Liberation Army. I spent nearly 50 years in prison, 49 plus months in prison for my activities in regards to the Black Panther Party, Black Liberation Army. While inside, I established the first national newspaper of prisoners called Armed Spirit. Established the first opportunity from which a petition was submitted to the United Nations in regards to prisoners and positions of political prisoners in the United States. I organized and established, along with my comrade, dear sister Sophia Asif Bukhari and Baba Herman Ferguson. In 1998, we established the National Jericho Movement that still exists today in terms of building support for political prisoners in this country. And in 2018, I inspired myself and comrades aspired to have the International Tribunal for the United States and bring the charges of genocide against the United States. And also I'm an author. I got 2 books written. We Are Liberators and also Escaping the Prison, Fade to Black. So now we're just working to try to survive the best we possibly can on all levels of work and development, trying to provide services to our communities, various organizations that we work with, including Spirit of Mandela Coalition, National Jericho Movement, our dear comrade, Lord Whitehorn and RAP, and this little organization I work with, Citizen Action, and various other organizations that we have, particularly in the state of New York, are trying to mitigate against the conditions of poverty that exist across this country, particularly here in Rochester, the 3rd worst city of poverty in the entire country. And it's horrendous what's going on here in this city. And we're trying to organize as best we possibly can ways to mitigate against the level of poverty that exists in the city. And building decolonization programs is part of that process. So, yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Can I just jump in for a second? Jalil, I'm so glad you're here. I was getting worried.
I'm sorry, Laura,
So
say it again, Laura, I missed that.
I just wanted to jump in for a second. First, I just wanted to say hi to Jalil. I was worried when he didn't show up. Just wanted to jump on one thing that you said, Jalil. So Jalil works with this group, Citizen Action. I work with RAP. Throughout New York State, there's this network of, unfortunately, it's not a network, it's separate organizations doing work, sort of, a lot of them define it as making the prison system livable. I mean, there's a lot, it's a broad range of the goals that people have set. We and Jalil are trying to abolish the prison system because it's a racist piece of oppression. But we're subverting some of the organization structures that are put into place by what I think is also, we haven't talked about it, and I think it has to do with the DNC too, which is this neoliberal establishment and this attempt to make it look as though there could be a kinder, gentler capitalism. And so when you talk about, envisioning, I was thinking, one of the reasons I said your movement is, your generation is so far ahead of us is because you're led people who have in their minds Octavia Butler's vision of things as opposed to George Orwell's the way we did. So I think that that's a beginning, but I do think, and this is so true in the Palestine movement right now, it's like everyone's heard it, the people who start out saying, oh, I hate the genocide, but I also don't like Hamas. And I always want to say, who cares what you think of an organization that's part of the national liberation struggle of an oppressed nation, which is fighting the institution of this country that also people think is a legitimate nation, Israel, and it's not. Who cares what you think? If you want to see an end to genocide, you have to support the resistance. And I think that, I know that there's been, unfortunately, one of my crosses to bear, because my partner, Susie Day, is part of WAWA, Writers Against the War on Genocide. And so they're constantly attacking the New York Times and taking it over and stuff like that. So I have to read it sometimes. And there are all these articles in there that first it was about the genocide is justified. That was the line. Then they've moved off of that. And now it's, the genocide isn't quite justified, but we need to get rid of Hamas and we need to have, a two-state solution and all this stuff. And we remember, Jalil and David, Aislinn, luckily you're younger than we are, so maybe you don't remember this, the whole argument around electoral politics that happened in the 60s too. And so we're at that point again. I mean, how many people here have been harangued by your friends saying, you have to vote, you have to vote. So I think that when I totally agree about looking towards the future. And I feel like when I say your generation is so far ahead of us, there's collective leadership. There are pieces of what a different society will be like. But I feel like right now, that's something we're arguing against, is this neoliberal, like the next stage. And it's sort of like now why we're calling now for arms embargo instead of just ceasefire, because ceasefire, that whole concept, is being co-opted by the United States, which, how do they get to do the ceasefire? They're the fire. And the last thing I just wanted to say, which I was moved by what you said, Aislinn, is that, and we find this, and I know, Jalil, we've talked about it, about the need to organize. Like one of the things we were doing in the 60s before Weatherman and during the beginning of Weather, and what I did first with the Panthers in Chicago was they had me going out helping sell the Panther paper on the street. And I was selling it to white people and trying to convince them why they needed to read the Black Panther paper and get behind the Panthers. That kind of on-the-ground organizing is unfortunately not as common as I think it should be. And the movement we're building has to include the people who aren't in it yet. The decisions, the vision of what we'll create has to come from a movement like that. And so I just wanted to emphasize that in what you said. I thought it was really important.
You know, back to where you started, Laura. You know, you talked about in New York, there's all these organizations, all these efforts around ending mass incarceration. Aislinn, we have the same thing in Illinois. We have many organizations, many campaigns, many individuals. How did those things become an irresistible social movement? How do we, I mean, partly Laura's pointing to organizing. We have to never stop organizing, talking to strangers, convincing people. But how do you see it in New York or in Illinois? Taking what I think is an incipient movement, how do we make it an irresistible social movement?
Sorry, if I can jump in on this question, and I think it kind of ties into the previous question about why it's important to march, to protest on the DNC. You know, there's a lot of, like I think about this, something that I learned from Hondo from the Jericho movement at the NARPA conference in 2019. He was drawing the connection between COINTELPRO and just like what is regular police and prison policy right now. You know, and we look at how, you know, what happened to Assata Shakur, what happened to Jalil, it also happened to people who weren't even in the movement, you know, decades later. Like John Burge was torturing children, you know, teenagers, and locking them up for decades. You know, the way that they assassinated Fred Hampton is the same way that they assassinated Breonna Taylor. So, you know, understanding those connections helps us cut through the lies that we hear from the enemy, you know, from the ruling class. Because they tell us a lot of stuff about, well, the police are here to protect you, you know, we're trying to save democracy, all this nonsense. And I think our organizing, you know, helps to clarify things for people, to educate people. You know, that's why it's so important to have these marches on the DNC. You know, tomorrow there's going to be tens of thousands of people in Union Park. There's going to be tens of thousands of people in Chicago throughout this week. You know, telling the Democrats, you're not the lesser of two evils. You're actually a part of the structure, this two-faced structure that is committing genocide, that is founded on genocide and slavery, and that, you know, has consistently for centuries continued to exploit and to oppress people around the world. So, you know, a demonstration is like the kind of the tip of the iceberg of all this other organizing that we have to do, you know, like the knocking on doors, the talking to people on street corners, the making connections between different organizations, like all that less glamorous stuff. You know, that's how we get to tens of thousands of people at one protest, right? That's how we get the kind of motion, the kind of irresistible social change, you know, is by educating people at protests and also between protests. And I do have to leave in a minute. But I just want to, before I go, I want to do one South African chant with y'all. And also, I really, well, actually, before we do that, just raise your hand if you're going to be at Union Park tomorrow. Okay, wonderful. Raise your hand if you're going to be protesting on Tuesday. Okay, amazing. Raise your hand if you're going to be protesting on Wednesday. Amazing. Raise your hand if you're going to be protesting on Thursday. Wonderful. Now raise your hand if you're going to be protesting indefinitely until Palestine is free, yes, and all of us are free. So, you know, we're building power in this moment right now. That's what we're doing, right? We're building self-determination in our different communities, and we're doing it united. So I just want to do this chant. I'm going to say Amandla, which means power, and I want y'all to say Awetu, which means to us, because who are we? The people, right? So I'm going to say it quietly, and then we're going to kind of build it up a little bit, right? Amandla! Okay, I saw some people I know we're wearing masks, but I saw some mouths not moving. So we're going to do this again. I want 100% participation. Amandla! Amandla! All right, so I want to see y'all all tomorrow. I want to see y'all throughout this week. We're going to keep protesting. We're going to keep fighting. We're going to win, yo.
You know, I raised the question about why the DNC, and I think it's important to ask what's our North Star? What does winning look like? I'm very glad Colby did that, because the real question is, are you going to be protesting Friday? Are you going to be organizing Saturday? It always is irritating to me when people wear the little buttons that say, I voted. I always want to say, and what else? You know, what else did you do? I mean, voting takes 15 minutes. You got 365 other days to go to work. And so I think that's important. But I think it's also important to ask ourselves this week, what is our North Star? What do we want? And just by way of context, I can say that in 1968, when I was organizing for the demonstration in Chicago, we had two goals. One goal was to bring 1 million people to Chicago. We failed miserably, miserably. A second goal was to show the world that there were a group of Americans who were not on the side of the government, and the slogan was, the whole world is watching, because our audience was not the Democratic Party. Our audience was the whole world. And so we saw it as a pedagogical moment, a moment to educate. So I think that's why I raised the question, why the DNC? Who's our audience? Who do we want to educate? How are we going about it? And what are we going to do on Friday? I think those are really important. David, you were going to say something.
Oh, I don't know if I was, but in terms of the current moment, we have to, when I listed the dangers, I didn't mention the rise of the far right, not just in the US, where there's a tremendous already history and basis in white supremacy and patriarchy, but in some of the global South countries, like India and Brazil. And I think we have to see that as a result of two related phenomena. And one is the devastation of neoliberalism in the global South, but for many people in the US, even a lot of white working class people who thought as long as they went along with imperialism, they were guaranteed a rising standard of living. But the other thing is the destruction of alternatives. Imperialism has been very successful at undermining what had been the national liberation struggles, at least any attempts to build socialism. Each movement, I'm sure, had internal weaknesses that have to be examined and learned from. But there's been overwhelming pressure, and some of the things I mentioned, economic sanctions, subversion, money funding, internal propaganda offensive. It's in the absence of a clear, visible alternative to neoliberalism, which means an alternative to capitalism, that the right, even in some global South countries, have been able to mobilize people around the most reactionary ideas. So our way to defeat the rise of the right is not so much in the electoral arena. It's about creating a movement that has a visible alternative. And you can start very small. When we started opposing the war in Vietnam, we were considered crazy fringe. But because those ideas are out there, when the war in Vietnam became a great difficulty for many people in America, there was some alternative other than drop the atom bomb. So I think in terms of the dangers of the period, it's very crucial that and of course we don't have the billionaires backing us or the media, so it's people power that we have to develop, but to create a clear alternative to neoliberalism, which means an alternative to capitalism. And the second thing I'll just say quickly is in terms of the dangers of a right that might be even more violently repressive, or a Democratic Party that's had some success at co-opting movements. And of course, all wings of the ruling class use both co-option and repression. One thing we have to be conscious of in building movements is to build a movement that's prepared to withstand repression and build a movement that's prepared to avoid co-optation.
You know, I want to just add one quick thing, David, and that is that, you know, sometimes we get stuck on thinking we have to figure out what the best thing to do or what the best vision is or get it all worked out on paper. And I want to draw our attention to Mariam Kaba's idea that we should engage in 1 million experiments, that we don't have to have the perfect thing, that we can do something. And Daniel Kisslinger and Damon Williams from Ergo in Chicago have put together a beautiful film that you should look for called 1 Million Experiments. And they're looking at places where people are creating alternatives to the way the society works, and not creating the perfect alternative, but a million alternatives, which is a way we can begin.
Well, I definitely support that, and that's what we're trying to inspire people to understand our capacity to do so, and building what we call the People Senate. I think that by engaging in that kind of level of understanding that we have to create alternative systems of governing, that we begin the processes of doing so. Remember that this country was created by what, 14, 15 white patriarchal slave herders, essentially. People that they wanted to enslave, people that want to commit genocide. So what does it say? That we as a people, when we get our ideas together, begin to imagine the possibility, can I also come together and create a new alternative systems of governing, right? It's been done once in history, it can be done again in history. We just have to believe that we can do it. And so for us, I think that for many of us, we have little alternatives given the contradictions that we have in this social order, particularly with the right wing and the Christian nationalist right wing. We're trying to create the conditions for what is called 2025 project, right? Which is essentially furthering the forms of genocides against people of color, particularly Black people. And so I think it's extremely important that we come to terms that we have no really clear alternatives other than create new goals and objectives in regards to how we're going to govern ourselves. Okay, and then again, I have to repeat this, right, because it's important. What we're trying to do under the People Senate, we're going to go to www.spiritofmandela.org/People Senate and learn what we're trying to do in understanding the dire conditions in which we are facing in this country.
We're going to wind up fairly soon. Laura, would you like to jump in at this point?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, I guess one thing about the experiments is that I also think the content of the movements and the organizations we're part of are part of that. So for example, if an organization is racist, is sexist, that is not holding, in subtle ways, not a Ku Klux Klan. And so, no disrespect to all of us who are in our 70s and were part of those organizations, but come on, we were ridiculous. And the change that has come about, and I think largely through the leadership of Black women in the social and political movements, is astounding and is part of what a future society will look like. So I just want to make sure that when we're thinking about envisioning change, and I think probably Miriam was thinking this, knowing her usual thinking and writing and stuff, is that the structures and the relationships we're building among ourselves. I had this really funny a conversation years ago with Eddie Conway, my dear, dear, dear Eddie Conway, who was a political prisoner in Baltimore who died a few years ago, way too soon after, and he served 44 years in prison in Maryland. He was part of the Black Panthers there. And he had gone to the first conference of the Movement for Black Lives, not Black Lives Matter, but the Movement for Black Lives. And then we were sitting around him, Susie Day, my partner, who was interviewing and writing a book about him, and Paul Coates, who was his terrific comrade for years and the founder of the Black Classic Press and a wonderful man. And we were talking about the conference, and Eddie said, I couldn't believe it. Like in the old days, for security, we would have had like 3 men usually, although I have to tell you guys, I was always on security because they looked at me and they said, you will shock the shit out of So let's put her on security. Someone tries to do something, they see this little thing and they're not expecting her to kick them in the knee. But it was mostly men, you know, and they were tough. And he said, so he gets to this conference and something jumped off. There was someone who was a cop who tried to get in or something. And all of a sudden, it's the entire conference under the leadership of 3 women who are just giving signals, comes and push the guy out. And he said he just had never seen anything like it. And it was as if, you know, usually if you have security, the other people don't know what happened. But everyone there knew what happened. Everyone had been educated to it by the process of doing it that way. And he said, you know, I never thought I would live to see the day when there was something that I couldn't find the leadership until they were needed. And then I could see it was all these people, mostly women, who. So I just feel like what has changed shouldn't be ignored, because it's really deep. And, you know, the release aging people in prison we're part of this coalition that we started called the People's Campaign for Parole Justice. That's it's trying to revolutionize the parole process in New York State, so that all the things that we were able to achieve, that are why we have a lot of comrades out here now instead of still in prison, get written into the laws. And they, you know, if the parole board commissioners change, they can't just fuck it up. So in this coalition, which is mostly younger people, there's a culture and values committee that deals with when harm is done, or when there's some kind of way in which the way that we're working is harmful to people or offensive. When it first started, I thought, what in the world is that? And now I get it. And it's a revolution in relationships inside organizations, as far as I'm concerned. And I was in organizations that had a lot of women in them. It wasn't like there weren't a lot of lesbians, but we never really revolutionized the relationships within the organizations. So it's another piece of it, I feel, in terms of building.
I think that one of the things I'm thinking about in line with what you all were just saying is that part of, I think, us getting more power, to speak to what Kobe was talking about, is that we actually do need to be better about defining what it means to be. I mean, I think terms like progressive and movement don't like have a definition, and there's like a wide tent of like folks who feel comfortable claiming that term. And I think that where we see the difference is the tactics and strategies we choose to employ, and the way in which we have solidarity with each other. Like, there are folks, I think all of us on this panel know folks who are like a part of organizations that have maybe ossified, like Aislinn was saying, or like have been co-opted, and then, you know, they're having, like, the DNC to them is a totally different thing, right? Like for me, you know, Aislinn, the Chicago Justice Torture Center, can't talk today, and like Tanya from Soul, for example, I think have a different claim, or can speak about what it means to organize against and help folks heal from the brutality of the state in a way that I think other folks who I think would want to claim that mantle can as well, right? And there's a difference. And like part of that is in working with directly affected people. Part of that is with building organization. Part of that is with being in solidarity with, you know, like NotMeWe and Stop, right? As we're doing housing work, right? And working together and drawing those connections. And so I think the DNC to a degree also is a moment that helps us signify like where folks are at. And I think we have to be like honest in naming that, and being committed to building with the folks who are clear that like, it's not just this one issue or this one piece, but like all of this is wrong, and not just here, but across the world, like Bill was saying. And I think that is, I think, something that is really important for us in this moment to think about, right? And to put in practice. I think, you know, we 2 days ago, so Friday, Christiana Powell, who's a member of STOP, got evicted from her home. She's a longtime black homeowner. There are some issues around what she believes, and we believe her, right? Like illegal foreclosure of the building and the way in which it was sold and things of that nature. And again, this is a moment where you had a black woman being evicted from her home. You had, a majority black led in terms of NotMeWe, and a black group in terms of Stop, even though it's not black yet per se. Like literally folks putting their bodies on the line, right? Students from University of Chicago who are part of the CBA coalition to create a blockade and keep this woman in her home against the police, right? One, this is the most police I've ever seen in Woodlawn, like at least, 60 plus, right? And we've had folks who, despite my personal views on the police, right? I understand folks in certain situations, they don't have other numbers to call, right? And they've called and no one has come. And so to see that amount of people there to evict someone as opposed to, keep people safe, right, was key. At the same time, right, the landlord who had got this building went to our understanding from talking to the people they had paid to work for them, right, like they are new to the state, right? They came here from they're Venezuelan, right? And they were picked up that morning and paid, and they didn't know where they were going or what they were doing, but they knew they was gonna get some money and lunch, right? And so they're gonna come and work to fix them. So we saw all these tensions play out in real time, and I think it's important for us to note that we do have to understand these things as being connected and the way in which those things happen, right? So the amount of resource that we've seen the city put into the DNC, from the road closures to the outside 300 to 500 officers. I don't know the number. I've heard different numbers, but 300 to 500 officers that are being trained in Woodlawn, right, to go oppress folks who are protesting against what the Democratic Party is allowing, internationally, but also locally, right? It's there are layers to these problems, and I think that to me is why I'm thinking a lot about it in this moment, right? How are we clear on who we are and who we're not, and how are we clear on who we're building movement with and not, and what power is and not. I think that we need a lot more, and we're getting there, right? But a lot more clarity about what it means to be in movement and organize with folks. Not everyone has to do what me and others did and directly put yourself, in front of the police and get pushed around and just deal with all that. But whatever role that you are taking and whatever organization you're a part of does need to be rooted in action, right? I personally feel we have so many brilliant people who are doing writing, and it's amazing, and everyone should write and be a part of that. And I'm we know the issues, right? And we do need to take action on those issues. And so that's, I don't know, I just rambled a little bit, but that's my thoughts.
Can I say something real quick?
Aislinn, you want to jump in?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, because we were watching that community response, because the news covered it. So over 70 police cars or police officers were called to that area, and the community came out, what Dixon was talking about, and to stop this eviction from happening. And it was really powerful to watch. And it was really important. And it just makes me also think about one of the, I think, important things about 2020 is that it has penetrated the dominant consciousness around what is possible. And I think similarly, when I consider the 60s and the 70s, and particularly the anti-Vietnam War movement, it was also about penetrating the collective consciousness around what the narrative around, the United States is. And there are these moments and opportunities where, we saw during 2020, all of a sudden, we have been in these meetings, we've been talking about abolishing the police, but we were always considered fringe, right? And there was no real mainstream conversation around it. But suddenly 2020 happens, and we have the largest global uprising around policing in history, and abolition is becoming talked about in a way that we hadn't prepared for. And it showed me in real time how there can be these moments of rupture where we can advance certain things, we can advance certain concepts. And so it's really important for us to, on the ground during the moments when there isn't rupture, which is the majority of the time, to do that work of really wrestling with these ideas, these concepts of liberation, concepts of freedom, so that when these opportunities happen, when the stars align, we can make these important contributions really to the world, and how we can be together in ways that are less extractive, less oppressive, less murderous. And so I think, it seems like global capitalism is in crisis right now. That's why we're seeing, the rise of these fascist movements, and that crisis has not been resolved. So how will it be resolved? Will capitalism be able to save itself? It saved itself. The most recent iteration was the creation of neoliberalism, right? And is there going to be another thing that capitalists are going to be able to unite around to save itself? Or are we coming to a moment when we can actually perhaps advance the world away from global capitalism, at least in its current manifestation, and actually address the climate crisis, right? Which capitalists are preventing us from being able to address, and which will undoubtedly cause the destruction of humanity and many other life forms if we're not able to stop it. But I think we're coming upon, these crises are intensifying and are increasing. And the resistance that Palestine is showing the world, I mean, it's so fucking beautiful. And then in my own personal reflections around the last year is the amazing leadership that these former colonial countries in Africa and Latin America have shown the world in being in opposition to Israel. South Africa's leadership, Algeria's leadership, Namibia's leadership. Now we're seeing Burkina Faso. And there are these moments of activity that are happening that are so, so, so exciting. And so part of, I think, the importance of the DNC is that we are delegitimizing their leadership. Like, fuck them. They are one side of the same coin with the Republicans and the Democrats. And we are absolutely capable of overhauling their ideological control over what is possible politically in this country and the world. And so I think part of the importance of us protesting the DNC is that that's what we're saying, and we're advancing this higher concept of we reject these as our only answers. We know we can create something better. We know there is something better. So yeah.
That was so fantastic. Can I just jump in for a second, Bill, and also put the last phrase to something you were saying before, which is when we said the whole world is watching, it was. So what you're saying, Aislinn, it will be successful. I just wanted to throw in one thought here, which is also that we should look at the land back movement, because the other thing that's happening around Palestine is I've been a supporter of the Republic of New Africa for years. I mean, we worked on the case of the RNA-11. Anyway, I won't go into it, but the whole concept of land as the basis for capitalist development. And so what would it mean to remove land from the capitalist empire, from the empire? And I'm not saying it is the answer. I just think it's another piece of what you're saying.
We started talking about history and being a part of history. And when Aislinn was speaking, I was thinking about a meeting in Chicago, right here on, say, Morgan and 34th, but in 1840. And imagine a meeting like this of abolitionists, very small, much smaller than this meeting. And it was 1840, and they were making plans, and they were writing leaflets, and they were studying, and they were organizing door to door. They were doing clandestine work. They were helping people escape. All these things were happening. But can you imagine in 1840 that this small group of abolitionists would have said, 25 years from now, this institution will change. 25 years from now, slavery will be ended and the slavocracy will collapse. I don't think they said that to each other, but it happened, and that should give us confidence that, hey, who knows what's going to happen 25 years from now. But what we do know is if we do the work, if we organize, if we study, if we agitate, if we educate, another world is possible, and we can be the midwives of that other world. Thank you all for coming. Thank you, Laura. Thank you, David. Thank you, Jalil. Thank you, Adrian. If you've got
As we used to
questions,
say,
bring her up.
venceremos.
So I think we're supposed to do. I know Bill has to go, but I think we're doing Q&A for a couple minutes. I think someone's supposed to bring a wireless mic. Okay, perfect. I will play Bill. I will be Bill now and moderate. I will try and live up to great skill. No problem. Good seeing you. You need help? All right, come on. Yep, I got you. It's all good. Any questions? Any questions? If there are none, then there are none, but. Okay, I think we're not going to do questions. Thank you, everybody, for coming.